Oh, pardon me, boy.
Yes, yes.
Is that the Chattanooga choo-choo?
That's the Chattanooga choo-choo.
On track 29. 29? Uh-huh. That's on the Tennessee line.
She said the Tennessee line. Jack, she means that she can afford.
I think due to the song, the Chattanooga Choo-Choo, etc., and the huge amount of tourism that occurs in Chattanooga, the tourists all see the railroads passing through the various areas in Chattanooga, and so it'll always be connected with the railroads. Before there were any railroads in Chattanooga, everybody traveled at 4 miles an hour. The entire world traveled at 4 miles an hour, be it on the water or with an oxen. And the concept of railroading powered by steam locomotives made it such that you could go 4 times faster, at least. The state of Georgia, who decided to build a railroad of their own from the middle of Georgia up to the Tennessee River, known as Ross's Landing, later to be known as Chattanooga, and they arrived here in May of 1850. By the 1890s, there were 9 railroads that chose to make Chattanooga their terminal. The terrain of this area allowed railroads to navigate most everywhere. All the various railroads terminated here and would exchange freight from their railroad to a railroad going in the direction that needed to go. If you're shipping something from Philadelphia to perhaps New Orleans, it would come down in 1859. It would move over the various railroads that were about 100, 200 miles long. And when it arrived in Tennessee, it would move down from Knoxville to Dalton, Georgia. And at Dalton, Georgia, it would then have to be offloaded and then moved 36 miles up the Western Atlantic Railroad to Chattanooga. And so there was a gap, an obvious direct gap between the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad in Cleveland and Chattanooga. No railroad was ever chartered to build eastward out of Chattanooga because of the mountain behind me known as Missionary Ridge. It was just a barrier to transportation, and to dig it and tunnel through it would cost at least $75,000 to $100,000, and that was a lot of investment money that would have to be expended. So in the 1840s, and no railroad was ever projected or promoted to build eastward out of Chattanooga. In about 1853, the idea of a transcontinental railroad was being pitched about, and it was obvious that if there was a southern route through Texas, it would pass through Chattanooga. And all you had to do was look at a map and see that a shortcut could be put in the transcontinental link by connecting Chattanooga with Cleveland, Tennessee. The only way to arrive here would be to punch a hole through Missionary Ridge at some point. Missionary Ridge runs for well over 25 miles from the bank of the Tennessee in a southwestward direction. So it was a barrier that could not be dodged. And they took estimates based on what they thought, and they thought the tunnel could be dug and finished for about $78,000. In 1854, one of the 2 competing railroads had the wherewithal to purchase the real estate we're standing on, as well as the ridge behind me. The East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad, having operating very successfully and financially, was able to acquire both of the competing railroads and combine their charters into their own, and thus they were able to have the financial backing to be able to penetrate Missionary Ridge. The Whiteside Tunnel allowed for the connection of the railroad from Chattanooga to reach the railroad coming from Knoxville. Well, it was all pick and shovel. They knew that going in. Explosives, using black powder for explosives, they knew wouldn't work because of the nature of the Missionary Ridge being stratified limestone and loose dirt. If you'd used any explosives, whatever digging you had done would cave in on itself. The tunnel kept collapsing. The nature of it was very unstable. They had to dig excavate an extra 3 and 4 feet out on the walls and on the roof so that arching material could be put in to support the mountain. Once this connection was made, you could essentially draw a straight line from Washington, D.C. to Memphis, Tennessee. And when a few months after this railroad line and the tunnel was open for business, the United States Post Office awarded the mail contract to the railroads between Washington, D.C. and New Orleans, and the contract called for the mail to travel in 72 hours between Washington and New Orleans, whereas 10 years prior to make that trip, we can show where it took at least 8 days. The tunnel saw as many as 70 trains a day during World War II, but as size of trains, railroad cars increased. For example, in the 1860s, the railroad cars were about 25 feet long and about 10 feet high. By World War II, they were 40 and 50 feet long and taller than that. But they knew the fragile nature of the tunnel, and they knew they couldn't expand it without just shutting it down and risking a collapse. So in the early 1950s, Southern Railway System, which eventually owned this property, this railroad, decided to build a detour around Missionary Ridge to the north, and on July 5th, 1954, this railroad line I'm at was abandoned. And eventually it became, they pulled the track up, it was all overgrown, and in the 1960s, the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, a nonprofit organization, came along and wanted to operate steam locomotives and passenger trains. And Southern Railway System donated this property to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum, and they rebuilt the track, and today they operate trains through here for people to experience what it was like to travel back in the 20th century. It can't be denied that it made Chattanooga what it was. The industry that located in Chattanooga for decades, the furnaces, the mills, the quarries around here, they couldn't have operated without the logistical support the railroads provided. 15 miles away from here, iron ore mines were opened up in the 1880s and 90s, and the iron ore was brought through this tunnel to the various blast furnaces in Chattanooga. And so the heavy industry that was in Chattanooga for so long was only capable of being there due to the logistical support the railroads provided, not only in getting the raw materials, but then in transporting the finished product to various parts of America and the world.